I will be moderating this discussion with a theme, very specific, delicate, trendy theme, exploring the use of data for urban planning and its various applications. I am architect, urban planner myself, and I also have done and I'm still working on several projects which include that. But but let's conclude what this discussion will be about. I would like to structure it into three parts. Uh, Firstly, starting from theory, trying to understand what big data means for everyone, and how urban planning in theory can achieve some certain goals for successful cities, and what does maybe United Nations say about that, and personal thoughts. The second part, to my view, would be quite useful to share our experiences, your field of work, your projects, what you're already working on, and if you would introduce them, how successful and non-successful, or maybe where to develop further. And the last part, I think it is essentially important to give already recommendations for everyone who is watching us, and to actually try to spread the knowledge, because personally I believe the knowledge is at its best when it's shared and when it goes open source. So hello everyone again, and maybe each of you, starting from Nicole Kirova, could introduce. Let's make an introduction round. So briefly, a bit about each oneself, and then we will start with the theory part.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Nicole. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I think my experience in urban data is quite limited, in the sense that I'm a designer and an architect, and currently I'm more into the research field. So I'm doing my PhD into material research for 3D printing and sustainable materials. But one of the projects that I worked on for quite a while was trying to explore alternatives for harvesting pedestrian data, and especially, moving from tracking to sensing, and how we can sort of start involving surfaces as sensors in the urban environment. It is on pause currently, but I was working on that for about 2 years and a half, and I managed to discuss quite a lot about it with different specialists in the field. So I think I would be sharing mostly their feedback on my work.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. I can't wait to hear further about that. And we also have here today Alex Berg. Maybe would you like to introduce yourself and to share a few words about you and your work?
I am a researcher at MIT's Media Lab's City Science Group. So my research focuses on the science of cities, and I do use a lot of big data. And our focus on using big data is to do so in ways that we can really extract a lot of utility from this data while preserving the privacy of the individuals who share their data. That's a really big focus of my research. And when we look at big data, we look at it as a tool that can serve policymakers by helping them make decisions and bring more people to the table with more knowledge. And we look to help people make community-based decisions by sharing knowledge, which is seems like your focus as well.
Amazing. Sounds really exciting. Especially when it's already being applied, these kind of things.
Yeah, and our research has recently focused on something that is similar to Nicole's work, which is the focus of using mobility data in particular to contend with the COVID crisis, because so much transmission is related to mobility.
Yes.
So
yes.
understanding how we can extract that type of information to help people understand the transmission of disease while also preserving the privacy of individuals has been our recent focus.
That's extremely useful, especially in today's situation. How we move, how should we move safer? Okay, extremely excited. And let's hear from our third guest, Jacopo Herstein. Could you share a few words with us? What do you do?
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Jacopo. I am a co-founder of Techia, which is a data analysis and data visualization company based in London. My background is in architecture. So long time ago, I studied architecture in Venice. Then I was working as an architect and then as an urban designer in a few different places, including Austria and London. And then at some point, my career path has changed a little bit. I started to code, and then I started to apply what I knew before regarding data analysis and planning with code and with big data. So since I started to be able to handle big data sets and do some analysis on that, then I really saw that there were a lot of new words and a lot of new dimensions opening. And that helped us to structure the business here. And basically what we do now is creating tools and analysis to advise urban designers or local governments or any type of organization that has some need to gather insights from their data or from data that is publicly available. And this is what we do.
It's indeed, I think we're lucky that there is software and that computers can manage this kind of data. In our heads, supposedly, this kind of huge information wouldn't fit at all. That's the new reality we're dealing with. And again, yes, indeed, without certain algorithms and how to cope with data, how to actually extract the essential points, that's a big thing and a big part of it all. Thank you. Can't wait to hear further thoughts of you. And let's give a few words for Saul Gabriele, who is co-founder of GovTech Lab. And thank you for gathering us all here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Saul, and I am a co-founder of GovTech Lab, but currently I'm not working there anymore since I shifted to a new project. So you're welcome. But I think Simon has gathered all of us here. But of course, they asked about the topic and about people that we would like to see here. So I just randomly throw everything into there, and I'm very happy to see you all here. I'm personally, I worked as an architect, and then I spent some time in the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia. And there was a place where I met technologies for urban planning. And one of those are data analysis, data visualization, and applying data for urban planning. So I did some academic projects being there. After that, I came back to Lithuania, and I worked for GovTech Lab. We established GovTech Lab, as well as I did some open data projects here in Lithuania, because we still have these problems, if you can call so, of being not that open, the government as it should be. And one of the reasons why I was always advocating for open data was because it's useful also for urban planning. And yeah, let's open as much data as possible. And one of the use cases could be here in city planning and city management. So yeah, together with GovTech Lab, one of our targets were also city municipalities, not only to use technology, but also to use the data that they have. And one of the fields is also data planning. And I'm very happy because today I also started a workshop at the university, at our university here in Vilnius. And we are here with the topic of Vilnius nightlife. We have a goal to teach students to map the data. They are doing this for the very first time, and I'm really curious how it will work out. But I think it's very important to start learning it here. I heard like people are doing this in foreign countries, in other universities, but here in Lithuania, it's still in Vilnius, it's still a very new thing, and a thing that is usually made by some programmers and coders, but I never heard about among architects. So I think we're here at the shifting point.
Cannot agree more. I think we're all here more or less pioneers. This is a completely undiscovered huge tool that we can actually shape our environments for the better. And yeah, amazing initiatives. And I myself want to share that yeah, it's actually great to see the actual use of data planning. I work myself on Lithuanian Comprehensive Territorial Plan Vision, and we actually gathered also a lot of data. But the thing is that it is really still scarce on the national level, especially if you want to use the data in planning, in urban planning. It has to be not through juridical boundaries, but actually per plots, and that's already a very different kind of data. Anyway, let's move back to you guys. So a bit of maybe let's connect already theory with practice. I think it will be more interesting, but let's touch both of them. So I have a quote for you, which comes to me all the time when I start thinking about the new technologies or smart cities or all the high-tech things that connects the cities. So we have the technology, right? But what was the question? There's a lot of new technologies going on, happening around, and we really want to use them all. But what is the question that we want to answer? So maybe each of you can try to answer what is your personal question that you're trying to answer using big data. And before that, yeah, it is really essential to engage uh, neighborhoods and citizens with all of its use. But again, what's your personal question that you're trying to answer? Let's start in a sequence that maybe or who raises a hand. I think Alex has an answer.
Sure. I have a few different projects where we had a few questions and used big data to have a few answers. So a bit more about my background, just because other people commented on their relationship with coding and data scientists. I have a background in math and computer science, and I worked for several years as a software engineer, most recently at Google, using a lot of big data from Google Search. And now I am a researcher, again, using big data in the form of mobility data from telecoms, as well as open public data sets. So your organization reached out to me due to one of my projects that used big data from city bike share networks, as well as census data, or data that is collected from the government about the demographics of the population. And this question that this project was trying to answer was, so in the United States, we have different bike share systems where there are docked bikes in different neighborhoods, and individuals can subscribe to these bike share networks and take a bike between these different docks. And this is a wonderful way to increase access to transit where, say, maybe more traditional transit like train lines and bus lines do not reach. So the question here was whether the placement of bike share docks was equitable. A lot of times in the United States, people might associate bikes with white people or privileged people. And our question was whether where these bike docks were being placed, which is what increases access to mobility and limits where people can go, because at the end of using one of these bikes, you need to dock it at one of these locations, whether that placement was equitable. So this was really more of a data visualization project where we were overlaying the placement of these bike docks over the demographic information about the cities. Anyone that's listening can look this up by just Googling income race bikes. That is the project title. And we use data from a few different cities in the United States. And what this project, what this information shows is a few years into the bike share system deployment, the placement of these bike share docks might be a bit equitable, but it doesn't usually start that way. Usually where these bike share docks start is in the more affluent or whiter neighborhoods. So that was a question that we attempted to answer with data and could continue expanding with more data and more cities.
Super interesting. Yeah. Bikes are, I guess, for all of us, with no doubt, very healthy and very, very nice transport mode, which we are rediscovering, I might say, after the automobiles. And especially if tech can answer also more questions as related with social inequalities, that's incredibly nice goal. Thank you for sharing this. Who else has an answer to the question?
Well, maybe
Nicole?
I can,
Nicole.
yeah, just jump on that first
Sure,
of all,
of course.
because just a thought on bikes. I don't have a driving license, and I've been going around with the bike ever since I had to, go larger distances. So yay, bikes. They're kind of, I think they're a very human way to travel around cities and a very inclusive way, especially I would say in Europe or in my past experience. But going back to the question, I think that what technology tries to answer for me personally in an urban scale is how we can sort of create more ecological, more human-centered, and more resilient cities. And I mean, that was the first premise that I started going in when I thought, okay, I have all these new tools that I was introduced in IX, so in the Institute of Advanced Architecture in Catalonia, where for me the whole technological sort of rediscovery happened from traditional architecture to whatever weird stuff I'm doing right now. So then I thought, okay, I have all of these new tools and I really want to figure out how to use them for the better, let's say, in the most generic way. And then for me, the better sort of answered in a more human-centric, design practices. And I really think that over time, this has grown even more. Currently, I started asking myself, how are all of these big data initiatives helping smaller cities? So, of course, we usually deal with data where we have it available. And a lot of the smart cities that are really developed would be, let's say, Copenhagen or Amsterdam or Berlin or even Barcelona. And then, of course, in the States, we have New York, LA, or really big and very well-developed cities. But how can we extract principles or practices from these cities and take them to less developed areas? So I come from Bulgaria, and especially from a very small town, which is sort of on the border between Romania and Serbia. It's on a very strategic geographic location, but in the past 15 years, the density, which in other cities is kind of a problem that we're trying to deal with data, for us, it's the opposite. So the density has been dispersing quite a lot. And I think this is an example that, you know, it's not one city, it's pretty much everywhere besides the megapolises. So something that I think should be investigated a little bit more in the future is how these big data practices can really help sort of balance out densities.
How to control uncontrolled urban sprawl and questions like this, I guess.
Exactly. To go more into even bigger from city to a region, maybe. So, you know, like we tend to reach the limit of a city scale, and this is already quite impressive. But you know, the city does have impact on smaller regions around it, or on villages and small towns, etc. So I think we should scale up even a bit more, I think.
Yeah, that's a nice one. Scalability, especially for these technologies, is essential. Yeah, I personally have worked with data that you can apply to different scales. There's regional scales, national scales, like, yeah, again, town scale. And then with all this data, when you find the right question, then you might find the right answer in this data. Very nice insights. Question of a question to Saul. What's your question that you want to answer? I think you mentioned it already, but you can elaborate.
To answer your question, I think I would like to go a little bit from more wider scale than going about one particular topic that we could answer or not.
Yeah.
For me, going into all these data things was because when I studied and did some classical urban planning projects, for me it was always the question is, why do we design things not based on a lot of I don't know how to say, not data driven, if you can call so, because we were doing nice designs and nice looking areas and creating some interesting functions. I'm talking about urban planning at university, but I was always wondering, is there a scientific proof of what we are doing here, and can we prove what this place needs, and what can we do this place to be successful and visited by people, and what can we do so that life happens over there and it's not just empty and just nice empty visualizations with hot air balloons. And for me, I couldn't answer this question when I was at my former previous university. So I went to study this city and technology thing. And what I learned that there were tools hundreds years ago, like first I think Serdar started doing this like 150 years ago. He was already measuring and calculating things in terms of urban planning when he wanted to do expansion of Barcelona. But yeah, he was doing it in own school way, analyzing a lot of papers and everything. And then there was young Gale who was doing this 40, 50 years ago, also with hand going and calculating people in Italian plaza, and seeing what makes people to be in one particular place, what makes it them to like that place, what makes life to happen there. And I think data is just a new tool, that like the data that we talked today about is just a new tool in order to analyze the space and in order to understand what do people do. And I think for me, it was the most interesting question, not how place looks like, but what to do there and how to make it wanted to stay in that particular public space or area of development. So for me, data can answer many, many different questions, whatever is your topic. But one of the main questions for me was how to make life happen between buildings, if you can call so.
It's very, very excellent insights. Actually, the question of a question belongs to Serdar. He asked it in 1962. I think I'm correct. Yeah, it's actually the essential part, I guess. When we have a lot of data, we can interlap it and see which places to relate that kind of data with where people live happily. where people need something, where people lack something, and by overlapping this kind of sets can really help as additional strong tool, not to create ghettofied communities, social inequalities, and so on and so on. It's very similar answers for me as well. Okay, Jacopo, are you there?
So yeah, for us, the questions vary based on each different project, but mainly regarding urban design, it's either how to improve a place that is already existing, and the other one is how to make sure that the design of a place that is going to be built in the next 20 years is actually built with the right assumptions. And that includes understanding how, the complexity of a place, not only from local knowledge, but through really the behavior of the city itself. And that includes a lot of different dimensions, movement, economics, employment, and we feel that with the analysis of data sets that include these dimensions, we can provide insight on how the place works now, and make a model or try to articulate some assumptions on how this can grow in a sustainable way. We've seen in the past many successful examples of new towns, but also towns that don't work very well. So what we hope that is happening in the future is that we can use the technology that we have available to help moving in a better direction. And regarding what we do with the places that need improvement, one project that we did recently was for the Global Institute of Innovation Districts, which is a network of areas around the world that have a strong academic or business direction. And they are very dense with businesses and academics that do research, and they collaborate between each other. And usually these places are very walkable. And so one aspect that we analyzed for these districts was really the walkability aspect, which is actually something that after the pandemic is more and more relevant. A lot of people move by walking more than our cities need to be more walkable. Finally, we recognize that. And in order to understand how walkable are the streets, we looked at a 24-hour period, and we analyzed data from mobile data from applications to understand how dense the various areas of the cities are. We looked at in-betweenness, so how the network of streets are structured, what are the most logical paths for residents and businesses and people to use. We looked at green spaces, street furniture, traffic, and what we tried to do was creating
everything.
Creating a model with and where each dimension has a weight that we also tested with someone on site, which provided to us a model that can be scaled up to other areas in the cities or in other places. And we found that studies that deal with this are super interesting and always offer some indication for improvements, or just by taking in account of what actually works at the moment, and highlighting also like what can be improved at the same time.
there's a very interesting point that you tackled, because actually um, to really get to know the whole context. Well, technology is does it provide answers like the big data, or does it give insights? That was a big question to me, because if it seems that if big data gives direct answers, we're no longer needed as human beings, right? So that's a very nice point that you said, that it gives insights, because otherwise we wouldn't be in control ourselves of our future environments. And that's a very large, interesting aspect. And to finalize, like maybe I see that Alex, you wanna give some comments. Okay, shoot, and then I will have the last question to all of you guys. Yeah.
I want to play devil's advocate and disagree. I don't think that having data answer questions removes the need of humans. I think that the most difficult thing to do as researchers is find what the right questions are to ask. And that is a very human, task. And we can use data and use human understanding of what insights we can take from that data.
Oh yeah, that was my point. But
to then do the analyses to answer good questions.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Maybe you misunderstood me. Like
sorry.
I said that it doesn't give answers at all. It just gives insights, which is exactly that, I guess. Okay. Remembering, probably everyone of you have heard about very interesting project which was called Cambridge Analytica, which used big data for interesting reasons. And there is a lot of fear in societies, especially when things get gathered, especially data, privacy. And the question for you is, it's a provocation. Will big data create artificial intelligence, and where could that lead us? What are your final recommendations for actual planners, that how to systemize that? Maybe you encountered some failures that you want to share, or mistakes that you want others not to do again, or some useful links how to extend the information for the topic, because it is still a relatively unknown theme for most of the urban planners, especially older generation. And personally, I'm also really, let's say, not afraid, but when I see huge industrial companies claiming that they're creating all sorts of smart cities, integrating all the use of the data, which is only for commercial reasons, there are some tricky parts there. Okay, so recommendations and urban planning. How can we actually use it? What are your successes, failures? Please share.
I could start. Yeah, I think you said a good point about smart cities and all this buzz around smart cities. So yeah, at least in academia world, this buzzword is no longer used. We talk about intelligent cities, but I understand there are so many people who still think that smart city is something what we need. We need all these sensors to see what's happening around, and all these surveillance cameras to let be followed, if you can also, and all these technologies to make cities smart. But I think the real smartness and intelligence comes from communities, when people are empowered by these technologies. And I think that's the next step, at least here in Lithuania, what we need to understand when we're talking about city planning, that it's not something that we'll have one technology and city municipality planning department will have it and use it in order to to analyze it and make some decisions. No, it's technologies are made to have, first of all, insights, but then to enable communities and people advocate their needs and to hear their wishes about particular places and what they want to have in the city. So to do so, I think first of all, it's not just a matter of technological education. Of course, you can learn technologies and go to online courses and analyze spatial data. And like GIS is not something very new and unknown in city Department of Planning, City Planning. They're already using GIS, ArcGIS or QGIS and analyzing the data in one way or another. But what we really lack is the communication with communities and having maybe some technologies in order to hear community's voice. So I think first step is to go outside to the city and see what do people do and what they want. And I think there are many technologies created for that. And we have one small here in Vilnius, which is more to register your complaints about public spaces around that you see, like parked car illegally or something like that. So you can already give some feedback to the city. So I think it's nice first step, but there are many more room to improve where we could go with the technologies.
Yeah, that's good insights. So empowering communities to actually educating them how to actually use it for their own lives, not only creating these big data sets. There's some really
I would like to add also another thing. I think there's one good project which I really like and show as an example to the students today is the one that is made by Techia, I think by Jacopo, the London Station Room. I think it's a very successful example because in that project, the real-time data was presented to citizens in London, how it looks like, the data, and what kind of decisions you can make with the data and what decisions are made with the data real time. I think that was a very good project because not many people have an idea of how does data look like. And I think this exposing to people what kind of data is collected by city and government is a really useful thing in order to stop being afraid of that.
Would you like to elaborate on that, maybe?
Yes, that was actually really the drive to develop that project, really to put the citizen in the middle of, in that case, a room full of data coming from various sources. And really the feedback that we had from the visitors was really interesting because really, like for some, this was the first time that they realized that what they wrote on the internet was actually available to everyone. So it was an interesting experiment that really exposed our place within big data and what are the challenges that this presents, including privacy, obviously, and but also opportunities. So our location is something that our location data is something that we carry with us all the time with our mobile. We don't know it, but it is already used by a lot of different parties. So the question is, how can this be also useful for us and for the common good?
Okay, that's a nice project. Sounds scalable, I guess. I think that's one of the points that where we can learn from each other. Okay. I also maybe Nicole would like to elaborate about the synapse system.
Yeah. So
how do you actually get the data from the bricks and what is it all about?
So that was like a big exploration that actually started from me getting familiar with nanomaterials or with graphene in particular. So I was in the studio in IAC, and we could select several materials that we could work with to develop something with them. And of course, I was super fascinated. You know, you have a nanomaterial in the lab, and you kind of imagine it's doing all kinds of weird stuff. Well, it doesn't really. It's a really good electrical conductor, and that's, I mean, it does have additional properties, but in the form that I was working with, it was in nanoplatelets. So it's not really pure graphene. It's like the affordable version of graphene. And me and my group mates started playing around with it and trying to explore how we can mix it to make it into something useful. And because it's carbon-based, and it's really hard to mix it with almost anything. It doesn't want to mix with water. It was almost unworkable, where eventually we came up with this lucky, very IAC type of fortunate event where we mixed it with something in the lab, and it started blending very nicely. Eventually, we came up with a very, very powerful conductive ink. And this was a whole process that came, like, it slowly started accumulating different knowledge about this material. And I got curious about what conductive materials could do, how we could transform them into sensors, and how we could sense essentially people with them. And I came across this capacitive sensing type of sensing, which is a very let's say primitive, like very easy way of sensing capacitive objects. And humans as such, we do tend to interfere with electrodes or with things where electrical current floats. And I could create this very large matrices very fast and very cheaply as well, with graphene and with different base materials. First, I started with plastics. Eventually, it went on being embedded into wood and clay, and finally in concrete. So once I figured out that I could embed my material in concrete, which of course has an urban application as a construction material, I started thinking, how could this be scaled up in order to come up with huge surfaces where we could understand location or interference from capacitive objects. And it turned out to be a very, let's say, a very good way to cancel out noise, because I could sense only people and very small animals, let's say, but I would very easily be able to cancel out like cars or bikes or metal objects, which was great. It meant that the data that I was collecting was very specialized, and it was very, let's say, it was very useful to start coming up with geolocation of people in real time without actually, going back to the privacy concern, without collecting facial info, like, like tracking them with facial recognition or, with their phone and like GPS and or satellite data or whatever. So it was sort of an alternative. Of course, it does come with a lot of limitations, and the scalability is a big limitation, because having this sensor within our cities would mean that a big part of our infrastructure has to be replaced. And as this data is already provided by devices that we carry with us all the time, it almost seemed as just providing an alternative and trying to tackle the question, are there other ways to understand how people move in cities, or what additional information can we give them? So on top of that, I was it started coming more not only on the sensing part, but on the response. Once you have this new infrastructure, could you embed different responses within it? So can we make our urban environment a little bit more engaging?
So it's more like interactive, using the technologies also to interact.
I started putting LEDs, which was the first incentive, but essentially I started putting also haptic or like vibrating devices that could guide, let's say, blind people within the urban area. So it is just, sort of providing an alternative. It's not really the final solution. But
Nicole, I'm really sorry. We're a bit of keeping like the time track. It's extremely interesting. Nanotechnologies and actual use of them in public spaces with materials. I haven't heard about that. Well, not as it's a nice one. Alex, I want to ask you about more how to make social inequalities less visible. How to use big data in terms of urban planning? How in through this through this topic? I believe you work on this field.
Yeah, I would love to speak more of that. First, I would like to build off of what both Nicole and Jacopo were talking
Sure.
about, of using location data that is collected from people's phones in a way that can serve as a public good, as well as preserve people's privacy, because this was the focus of my last year of research and in my master's thesis. So I feel like I have a lot to add here. What Nicole was saying makes a lot of sense. What the kind of data that is collected by those types of sensors lacks, though, is the ability to track people. And tracking people can be very privacy sensitive, but it can also give us types of information that are really useful, such as people that go here at this time are more likely to go here at this time. And those types of relationships are what allow city planners and urban planners to create what are called origin destination matrices and allow people to better plan transit routes, or just understand how different people flow through the city and which groups mingle and which don't. And that can be really useful. And so my research was about how we can use machine learning. So what I did was I used machine learning to use these big data sets that had been provided to my group from the companies that collect this type of data from smartphones to train models that can then produce synthetic data sets that have the same properties as the real data, but since they represent the mobility data of a synthetic population, they can preserve privacy. So that was one way that we use these data sets in ways that can serve the population from whom they were collected, as well as preserve their privacy. Another way was using similar types of big data collected by telecoms, as well as through smartphone apps that track people, to understand how people responded to the COVID crisis. Where were the types of places that people stopped going? What was the change in the timing at which people went to these places? But more specifically, where did different groups of people start coming into contact with each other? Because that is really what relates to the spread of transmission. And we also looked at how people's mobility behavior changed and how this impacts the spread of the virus. And there are a lot of equity questions at stake here. We found that, for example, in big cities, that people with more privilege or lived in more affluent areas left the city in much higher numbers than people of lower incomes who may not have had the means to do so. So I could go on and on, but those are just a few examples.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's brilliant. I'm already in love with your work. Sounds excellent. How to actually address these kind of issues, especially with the COVID situation. And wrapping up a little bit our discussion. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your ideas, and I hope that further collaborations can happen and continue between each of us, and all these projects. Let's share them between us. I would like to end, I guess, with one interesting thing that I myself investigated. It was the data maps of actually, well, we are in the climate change time within in the era of man, of anthropogenic era, as geologists say so. And I analyzed data of pollution and overall throughout the world, and it was dramatic results that during the peak of the crisis, the pollution really dropped by a huge percent, like twice, triple, quadruple. And when in Lithuania we think that we didn't develop the third industrial revolution, which means we don't have bigger factories. However, it still affected a lot the air locally here too. And we showed this data to local politicians, and then it directly had their attention. So this is another quite a case use to empower certain political decisions while proving with backing by data and science. And lastly, I believe we should all try to strive for with the data to maintain natural environments in balance together with anthropogenic environments, which is, and then the question, if we manage to do that with the help of big data, then we have much bigger chances of having much more beautiful planet as we know it. Yeah, thank you very much everyone for the discussion. Have a great day and maybe see you sometime in the future.